This is your internalization video for the 5th grade Excel curriculum, lessons 64 and 65. This week, students are going to get additional practice with multiplying and dividing decimals, with the first lesson focused on multiplying decimals. In this lesson, students are going to multiply using the standard algorithm. And this first problem requires students to multiply a whole number by a decimal with two numbers behind the decimal point. So the first step is for students to set the problem up vertically. And then students are going to think about how to multiply, first ignoring the decimal point. So we're going to start with the 7 and multiply the 7 by every digit to get their first partial product. And then they're going to do the same as they multiply by 2, and they're going to get a second partial product. And the final step is to add their partial products. When multiplying decimals, the most important step for students is to identify where the decimal point goes. If we look in the first digit, there are two numbers behind the decimal point. So there are two decimal places in that digit. In the second number, there isn't a decimal point, so there are 0 decimal places. So that means in my final answer, I'm going to add these two together and get 2. There needs to be 2 decimal places. So when I have 33,318, and I actually need 2 decimal places, that becomes 333 and 1800ths, which is what we have here. So when students get to the try it question, before they multiply, I would ask them, how many decimal places do you need? And they should be able to quickly look and tell you 2. Then as you lap and watch kids multiply, just ensure they are lining up the numbers correctly and that they add their partial products. Students are then going to get some at-bats with multiplying decimals. In this first worksheet, decimal triangles, the setup of the worksheet could become confusing, so it's going to be helpful to help kids orient to what they're looking at. The numbers in the box are factors, and they are using these factors to help determine how you get the products that are already written in the boxes. So for example, if we start with 28 hundredths, we need to know what two factors in that green box multiply together to give me 28 hundredths. That's 7/10 and 4/10. They're going to use this same train of thought to complete the factors for all other triangles. And then they're going to jump into some traditional practice. For questions 9 through 14, students are understanding here, demonstrating their ability to understand the communicative property of multiplication. So simply said, that order doesn't matter. I can multiply numbers in any order. So that's what this is assessing. Questions 15 and 16 are assessing whether or not students comprehend how many decimal places need to be in their products. And then in questions 17 through 20, it's assessing students' ability to multiply. They're going to need scratch paper for 17 through 20. And as students work, again, you want to check that they are setting problems up correctly. You want to check that they have the correct number of spaces, correct number of decimals in the product. As we jump into lesson 65, students are now dividing decimals. In this first problem, students are using a model to divide decimals. And so we start with 1 and 23 hundredths divided by 3. So we first want to understand what that means. That means I am taking 1 and 23 hundredths and dividing it into 3 groups. So first I need to show 1 and 23 hundredths. And then I need to divide it in each group into 3 equal groups. What you see here is that it's divided into 3 groups based by color. So don't let that confuse you. That is being divided by color. Then the model for you separates the 3 colors. They count the number of squares in each color, and that's how we get 41/100ths. As students jump into the next example, we are again dividing 1 23/100ths by 3. Here we want to make sure students understand the parts of the division problem. We have the dividend and the divisor. Students are in 5th grade, so they might remember saying which number goes in the house. The dividend goes in the house. So 1 23/100ths goes in the house. The 3 goes on the outside of the house. And when I'm dividing decimals, the very first thing I do is bring up my decimal point. And then I have to decide where do I put the first digit in the quotient? The quotient is their answer. And so if I look at this number, I have to ask myself, are there enough ones to divide by 3? And if the answer is no, that means a 0 goes in the ones place. And so now I'm moving into the 10ths place. And I'm thinking to myself, how many 3s go into 12? And that answer is 4. I'm going to multiply 4 times 3. I get 0. I'm going to bring down that 3. And I'm going to ask myself how many 3s go into 3. That answer is 1. I'm going to multiply 1 times 3. Because 3, when I subtract, I get 0. So when they get to the discussion question, it might be helpful for students to set the problem up. I know that 6 42/100ths is my dividend, so that's going in the house. And I'm going to ask myself, are there enough ones to divide by 2? And the answer is yes. So my first digit is going to go in the ones place. As we move into another example, I have 12 36/100ths divided by 1 2/10ths. My divisor is a decimal. Divisors can never be decimals. So we want to multiply this divisor by a multiple of 10 to ensure that it's a whole number. So I see that I have 1 decimal place in that number, so I'm going to multiply by 10. 10 times 1 2/10ths is 12. Because I multiply the divisor by 10, I'm going to also multiply the dividend by 10. So 12 36/100ths times 10 equals 123 6/10ths. Now I'm going to follow the same process I did with the first example by first identifying where the decimal point goes and then where the first digit goes. So if I look, my first digit's in the hundreds place. Are there enough hundreds to divide by 12? No. So now I'm going to look in the tens place. Are there enough tens to divide by 12? The answer is yes. So my first digit goes in the tens place. I am going to keep following the steps to multiply, and I get my final product, 10 3/10ths. And then, because multiplication is the opposite of division, I can always use multiplication to check my answer. This is a great way to have students practice the skill they worked on yesterday with multiplying decimals. So as students jump into the practice, questions 1, 2, and 3 are going to be really, really important. So you want to make sure they get these questions right first before jumping into the division. For your students that have larger handwriting, it might be helpful for them to have scratch paper to set their problems up if you notice that they need the additional space. But what you really want to make sure here is their digit, is their solution starting in the correct place value.